Up until a couple of years ago, the mainstream media wouldn't even admit that plans to implement global government existed. Of course, this was a patent lie, as the most prominent members of the mainstream media had attended meetings such as the Bilderberg group for decades, meetings they wouldn't even admit existed to the public, meetings that consisted of the most rich and powerful business elites in the world and politicians from countries all over the world. It's said that at these meetings, these rich elite businessmen and politicians plan the future direction for global government. We also see groups like Davos of the World Economic Forum, where again, these elite corporate titans, these elite banking titans and politicians meet annually to discuss the direction of the world. If you've looked into it, you've heard about things like Agenda 21, which has become Agenda 2030. But unless you're really willing to dive into the literature, unless you're willing to do deep research, it's hard to understand or articulate to someone exactly what the anti-human intentions behind these plans really are. A couple of years ago, the world started to wake up that the implementation, or at least the attempted implementation, of globalization or global government was a thing. So the people who wish to implement the global government changed their tune and began to attempt to try to sell it to the public. And 2 years ago, we were provided this gift, which shows what the real intentions, what the end game behind a plan for global government will look like. Welcome to 2030. I own nothing, have no privacy, and life has never been better. Welcome to the year 2030. Welcome to my city, or should I say, our city. I don't own anything. I don't own a car. I don't own a house. I don't own any appliances or any clothing. It might seem odd to you, but it makes perfect sense to us in this city. Everything you considered a product has now become a service. We have access to transportation, accommodation, food, and all the things we need in our daily lives. One by one, all these things became free, so it ended up not making sense for us to own much. First, communication became digitalized and free to everyone. Then, when clean energy became free, things started to move quickly. Transportation dropped dramatically in price. It made no sense for us to own cars anymore because we could call a driverless vehicle or a flying car for longer journeys within minutes. We started transporting ourselves in a much more organized and coordinated way when public transport became easier, quicker, and more convenient than the car. Now I can hardly believe that we accepted congestion and traffic jams, not to mention the air pollution from combustion engines. What were we thinking? Sometimes I use my bike when I go to see some of my friends. Like they would let you own a bike. I enjoy the exercise and the ride. It kind of gets the soul to come along on the journey. Funny how some things seem never to lose their excitement. Walking, biking, cooking, drawing and growing plants. It makes perfect sense and reminds us of how our culture emerged out of a close relationship with nature. Environmental problems seem far away. In our city, we don't pay any rent because someone else is using our free space whenever we do not need it. My living room is used for business meetings when I am not there. Once in a while, I will choose to cook for myself. It's easy. The necessary kitchen equipment is delivered at my door within minutes. Since transport became free, we stopped having all those things stuffed in our home. Why keep a pasta maker and a crepe cooker crammed into our cupboards? They need that space for the business meeting. We can just order them when we need them. This also made the breakthrough of the circular economy easier. When products are turned into services, No one has an interest in things with a short lifespan. Everything is designed for durability, repairability, and recyclability, because we know when you take profit out of it, people work so hard to make things sturdy and strong. The materials are flowing more quickly in our economy and can be transformed to new products pretty and easily. Environmental problems seem far away, since we only use clean energy and clean production methods. The air is clean, the water is clean, and nobody would dare to touch the protected areas of nature because they constitute such value as to our well-being. In the cities, we have plenty of green space and plants and trees all over. I still do not understand why in the past we filled all free spots in the city with concrete. The death of shopping. Shopping? I can't really remember what that is. For most of us, it has been turned into choosing things to use. Sometimes I find this fun, and sometimes I just want the algorithm to do it for me. Who needs to think? It knows my taste better than I do. When AI and robots took over so much of our work, we suddenly had time to eat well, sleep well, and spend time with other people. The concept of rush hour makes no sense anymore, since the work that we do can be done at any time. I don't really know if I would call it work anymore. It's more like thinking time, creation time, and development time. For a while, everything was turned into entertainment and people did not want to bother themselves with difficult choices. It was only at the last minute that we found out how to use all these new technologies for better purposes than just killing time. They live different kinds of lives outside of the city. The wilderness people. My biggest concern is all the people who do not live in our city. Those we lost on the way. Those who decided that it became too much, all this technology. Those people, the poor people, wanted to think for themselves. Those who felt obsolete and useless when robots and AI took over big parts of our jobs. Those who got upset with the political system and turned against it. How dare they turn against the politicians? They live different kind of lives outside of the city. Some have formed little self-supplying communities. Others just stayed in the empty and abandoned houses in small 19th century villages. Once in a while, I get annoyed about the fact that I have no real privacy. Nowhere I can go and not be registered. I know that somewhere, everything I do, think, and dream is recorded. I just hope that nobody will use it against me. I'm sure they won't, lady. All in all, it's a good life. Much better than the path we were on, where it became so clear that we could not continue with the same model of growth. We had all these terrible things happening. Lifestyle diseases, climate change, the refugee crisis, environmental degradation, complete congested cities, water pollution, air pollution, social unrest, unemployment. We lost way too many people before we realized that we could do things differently. Does that make your bones chill? After the article was released, it went viral, and the Davos group received a lot of pressure for an explanation, so they added an author note as a way of providing public relations. But it doesn't change what their members envision when they meet and speak in private. Author's note. Some people have read this blog as my utopia or dream for the future. It is not. It is a scenario showing where we could be heading, for better or for worse. I wrote this piece to start a discussion about some of the pros and cons of the current technological development. When we are dealing with the future, it is not enough to work with reports. We should start discussions in many new ways. This is the intention with this piece. It is very difficult to articulate why the plan behind Agenda 21 is so anti-human. But if you take the time and do the research, you realize what they're talking about is the removal of basic property rights, where a government can come in onto your land that you own and claim for a very wide range of environmental reasons that you no longer own your property. Think about the Bundy case. This article then takes that a step further. First, they're saying that in the future they don't want us to own property, which again, if you look at Agenda 21, which has become Agenda 2030, this is very obvious. So then the article takes it further, not only saying that you won't be able to own property, right? You live in a government-provided small apartment, and when you're not there, the government can have whoever they want in your home for business meetings or whatever it might be. On top of that, it's saying that you can't even own property itself. That anything you have has to be sanctioned and brought to you by the government, has to be stamped by a bureaucrat. And when they say it's time to give it back, it's time to give it back. And of course, there's no escaping from this system, because the system they're describing, the artificial intelligence they've been rolling out, is saying that people won't be able to have jobs. People won't be able to sell their goods and services. They won't be able to make money. And without this, there's no basic freedom. Have you seen people that don't have money? Do they come off as free and happy people? This is the world that they're describing. A world of people trapped in poverty. A world that we've seen tried time and time again. A world that we have seen fail time and time again. What they're talking about implementing with a nice smiley face on it is global communism, where a very small group of elite and powerful people have control. And of course, what do you think will happen when you speak up against this system once it's implemented? What is the end game of this? As the article already described, AI will take away all of your privacy. So if you speak up, the government will know about it. The article is literally describing the utopian future of George Orwell's 1984. Democide is when government kills its own citizens. 262 million people died of democide in the 20th century alone. And most of those people died under communism, the guise of utopia, the guise of the utopia of taking away individual liberty, of property rights. This has been part of a plan for a long time that it's finally being talked about publicly. And I bring it up to you today because Donald Trump is going to be attending Davos, and there's a lot of public attention on the World Economic Forum. These think tanks that plan to make government global rather than national. The United Nations, the European Union, the Euro, planned for the Amero. This is constantly rolled out. How has Brexit gone? The British people have voted to leave the European Union, and their leadership in the European Union is saying, you're not allowed to do that. When you start to research these things and put it all into perspective, you see why open borders starts to make sense, because they're trying to erode sovereignty, create a welfare state, use it as a magnet to bring in people from the third world who become reliant on the welfare state. They then vote to increase the power of government, a government that is pushing for global government, which is why we see the Trans-Pacific Partnership. These are unilateral trade deals between 12, 15, 20 different countries. And the reason for that, the reason they want that is when there is disputes, it goes to international courts. And whatever those courts rule become international law, subverting national law. This is a way of implementing global government. This is why we see the Paris Climate Agreement, which by all measures would do very, very little to impact the climate. And that's aside from the debate on whether man-made climate change, and notice I said man-made, is as bad as it is propagated to the public to be. Because again, these disputes go to international courts and become international law. We also see the push for carbon taxes, because once you're able to put in taxation, once you could tax across country lines, then the entity that has the ability to wage and collect taxes essentially becomes government. The American government doesn't have much teeth without the force, the immoral force, of the IRS. This puts identity politics into perspective. This is why you see politicians breaking everyone up by groups. It's men versus women, whites versus blacks, gays versus straights. They want people to accept the collective at the expense of individual liberty. Now that the media has been forced to admit that the Bilderberg group does in fact exist, the Bilderberg group started releasing talking points about the topics of their meeting. Look at the topics just this year. The Trump administration, a progress report, transatlantic relations, options and scenarios, the transatlantic defense alliance, notice it's all global, the direction of the European Union, can globalization be slowed down, jobs, income, and unrealized expectations, the war on information. Have you noticed a war on grassroots media? Have you noticed the social media companies clamping down on the free flow of information? That gets pushed from the top. Why is populism growing? Because populism is a return to nationalism, and they fear this. The Russian international order. Where do you think the Russian narrative has come from? Russia threw out the globalists a few years ago. They threw out George Soros. They threw out the global bankers. And that's why we see the public backlash toward Russia. The Near East, nuclear proliferation, China, and current events. The World Economic Forum. The end of globalization? Davos disagrees. Globalization on its own is not a bad thing. We are a global community, and that's why advancements in blockchain are so encouraging, because it's a global community not controlled by a centralized force. The global community that the world's corporate leaders, that the world's politicians are pushing is anti-human, because it's a global community controlled by a very small group of rich, powerful, and influential people who wish to take away basic property rights. They're talking about implementing global communism, or at least a form of it. And history has taught us that there is no such thing as a centrally government-mandated, authorized through government-forced utopia. The only true utopia that can ever exist could come in the form of individual liberty. Thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate your support. These are very difficult topics to articulate, but I want to do my best to fight for liberty. We need to fight against global government, push back for national government, because when there's national government, you have more sovereignty. Your vote counts more than global government. When there's state government, your vote counts more than national government. And when there's local government, your vote counts more than state government. We need to shrink government. These people at the top are psychopathic and power hungry, easily controlled by money. We can't allow them to take away our basic freedoms and liberties. If you want to follow me, I'm TomFFRnews on Twitter, Tom Anderson on Gab, Tom Anderson on Facebook, FFRnews on Facebook. I don't post as much on Facebook anymore because the algorithms are so inhibiting. It's just very difficult to reach people. I have found what might be the next Facebook alternative, Steemit, something I'm very excited about. So if you haven't been on Steemit, take a look at that. Sign up. I think it might be a blockchain-led platform of the future. All right. Thanks, guys.